To many film fans, any remake announcement triggers an instant eye roll. Because let's be honest, the history of Hollywood is littered with the corpses of unimaginative, even disrespectful remakes lazily churned out for a quick buck. At their worst, they can be a testament to the cynical lack of creativity in certain quarters of the industry. And while not all remakes are created equal, it's easy to see why so many approach them with a truckload of skepticism. All the same, there are clearly some films that just seem off-limits to studios for one reason or another. Perhaps the movie in question is so iconic or so reliant on its central performance, or the international content simply wouldn't translate well to English-speaking sensibilities. And yet, while these films all seemed fairly safe from the remake treatment, studios gave it the old college try anyway, daring to develop remakes of these acclaimed and/or iconic movies. But in each case, success was just nowhere to be found. The projects ended up cancelled for one of many different reasons, or have just spent an eternity languishing in development hell. It's certainly tough to lament the demise of these remakes though, that's for sure. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 movies you won't believe they tried to remake. Number 10, Escape from New York. John Carpenter movies have such a unique style and tonality to them that remakes are always going to leave his fans up in arms. And oh boy, they were not happy when a remake of cult classic Escape from New York was first announced. A remake of the 1981 Kurt Russell starring sci-fi actioner began development in 2007, with Gerard Butler initially signed to play a rebooted version of the Snake Plissken character, while Len Wiseman was tapped to direct. But Wiseman ended up departing the project and was replaced by Brett Ratner, who also later left. And as the creative process continued to stall, New Line Cinema ultimately cancelled the remake in 2011. In 2015, however, Fox took a crack at it, with Robert Rodriguez set to direct a script written by Lee Whannell, with Carpenter himself even lined up to produce. Kurt Russell's son Wyatt was also approached to star as Snake, but turned it down. Rodriguez ended up exiting and was replaced by Radio Silence in 2022, though by the end of that year, the project had been reimagined as a direct sequel to the original rather than a remake. Now that's certainly less sacrilegious to fans, but honestly, if Kurt Russell's not involved, does anyone really care? The answer is probably a big ol' nope. Is there a remake out there that you actually love? Will you let me know in the comment section what it is and we'll all talk about it. Number 9, Taxi Driver. Though some might argue that Todd Phillips' Joker is basically a loose remake of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, an honest-to-God straight remake has thankfully been seen as sacrilege by most everyone. But back in 2010, reports emerged that Lars von Trier was actually working with Scorsese and original star Robert De Niro on an experimental remake. This new take on Taxi Driver would adopt the format of von Trier's acclaimed documentary The Five Obstructions, where he challenged his filmmaker mentor Jorgen Leth to remake his own short film The Perfect Human 5 times, with von Trier imposing specific restrictions each time. Now it's an undeniably more intriguing route than a straight remake, though by 2014, Taxi Driver writer Paul Schrader confirmed that it wasn't going to happen, rubbishing the quasi-remake as a stupid idea. Tell us how you really feel, Schrader. Schrader elaborated that he and Scorsese have fought to keep Taxi Driver a one-off without spin-offs, sequels, or remakes over the decades. And so, with that in mind, it seems incredibly unlikely we'll ever see their masterpiece retold. Probably for the best, let's be honest. Number 8, Terrifier. Damien Leone's Terrifier is one of the greatest horror success stories of the past decade. Produced for just $55,000, the indie slasher grossed over $400,000 at the box office thanks to word of mouth, leading 2022's Terrifier 2 to net a stunning $15.7 million worldwide, against a mere $250,000 budget. That is impressive. But while recently doing the press rounds for Terrifier 3, Leone told Total Film that the first Terrifier was almost acquired by a large movie studio he elected not to name, who, rather than release the film, wanted to remake it with less gore for a more mainstream audience. The Terrifier films have been released unrated by Leone due to their extreme violence, but the studio in question wanted to tone down the gore for a remake that could get an R rating from the MPAA, and therefore receive a wider theatrical release. Ultimately, Leone turned the offer down though, and kept forging his brutal path ahead, which has clearly worked out extremely well for him. People love that clown. Number 7, Revenge of the Nerd. Revenge of the Nerds is nothing if not a movie that is so thoroughly of its time that it really needs to stay where it is. The iconic 1984 comedy was a critical and commercial hit, though contemporary re-evaluations haven't been kind to it at all, singling out how it plays sexual assault for laughs. Enough that even director Jeff Canoe and writer Steve Zacharias expressed their regret about these scenes. But back in 2006, a Revenge of the Nerds remake wasn't merely announced, it actually ended up being partially shot. With a cast led by Adam Brody, the remake began shooting in November 2006, but after 2 weeks of production, it was shut down due to Fox's top brass being dissatisfied with the early footage. Fox even went far enough to state the unlikelihood that they would ever take another shot at a remake. Though in 2020, Seth MacFarlane did announce his plans for a Revenge of the Nerds reboot, which mercifully still hasn't come to fruition yet. In an era where the whole nerd-jock dichotomy seems hopelessly played out, remaking this one just feels like a massive fool's errand. Leave it alone maybe, yeah? Number 6, Akira. Akira is quite arguably the single most iconic anime of all time, a relentlessly creative visual feast that's inspired innumerable filmmakers over the last 35 years. A live-action Hollywood remake has also been in development long enough that it even has its own Wikipedia page. There it is. Sony first acquired the rights to the Akira manga back in the early 1990s, but abandoned plans due to budgetary concerns, prompting Warner Bros. To pick the project up in 2002. Over the next 20 years, Akira attached 5 separate directors and 10 writers, all of whom have struggled to crack a live-action take. Involved filmmakers include Stephen Norrington, Albert Hughes, Jaume Collet-Serra, George Miller, and most recently, Taika Waititi. Waititi has been attached to direct for more than 5 years at this point, but considering how continually busy his schedule is, and how tricky Akira is to adapt, it seems incredibly unlikely it's ever actually gonna happen. Needless to say, a live-action Akira movie would need a huge budget to live up to the anime's mesmerizing visuals, and that just doesn't seem tenable in current Hollywood. Let it remain in development hell forevermore. Thanks for stopping by to watch this What Culture video today, you lovely person you. If you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below and you will get more of these What Culture videos in your life. A grand life, that is. Yep, sounds good. Number 5, Audition. Audition is one of the most unforgettable horror films of the 1990s, a deeply disturbing offering from legendary Japanese filmmaker Takashi Miike that seems totally counter to the sort of genre joints Hollywood likes to produce. All the same, in 2014, a remake was finally announced, with the intent to make it a more faithful adaptation of Ryu Murakami's novel rather than simply remaking Miike's film. Producer Mario Casa even said the film was almost there in 2016, but almost a decade later, it still has not materialized. Curiously, earlier this year, Mr. EE himself, Kevin Bacon, revealed that he also spent years trying to get Audition remade. Bacon, who loves Miike's movie, added that his remake also got close to happening, but he couldn't get it all the way. But given the infamous violence of Miike's original film and how an American remake would almost certainly water the content way down, this is surely for the best, right? Number 4, Yellow Submarine. 1968's animated Beatles-themed musical Yellow Submarine is nothing if not a true original. A brilliant fusion of psychedelic visuals and, of course, the band's incredible music. Despite the film's singular place in pop culture, Disney actually mounted a remake in 2009, with Robert Zemeckis planning to produce it with cutting-edge performance capture techniques. As per his prior films, The Polar Express, Beowulf, and A Christmas Carol, turned into Scrooge there, Disney were keen to get it out for 2012 in time for the London Summer Olympics, with Peter Serafinowicz cast as Paul McCartney, Kerry Elwes as George Harrison, and David Tennant as the Blue Meanie. What a lineup. But the project was cancelled in 2010 due to the underperformance of both A Christmas Carol and another pricey performance capture project, Mars Needs Mums. Oh boy. Zemeckis then tried to take the movie to other studios to no avail, before he himself admitted that it was probably best not to remake it. Test footage from Zemeckis' remake did leak online in 2021 though, and while it certainly touted a fittingly off-kilter art style, given the generally polarized response to Zemeckis' performance capture films, it's tough to have much faith that the full feature-length project would have really been worth it. Best to just let it be, eh? Number 3, Near Dark. Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark is one of the greatest and most unique vampire films ever made, and despite flopping at the box office in 1987, has endured over the decades as a bona fide cult classic. In fact, a remake was even announced in 2006 by Michael Bay's company Platinum Dunes, the same outfit behind remakes of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Amityville Horror, The Hitcher, and Friday the 13th. The groans, well, they came thick and fast. Bigelow's film has such a unique place and identity in the horror genre, and trying to replicate the impossibly effortless cool of the late great Bill Paxton is a basically thankless task. So what a relief it was then when the remake was canned by late 2008, when producer Bradley Fuller revealed the success of Twilight killed the project dead, which, also focuses on a romance between a human and a vampire. And so, for as much of a punching bag as the Twilight franchise is, we clearly have it to thank for something. We salute you sparkly vampires. Number 2, Battle Royale. Kinji Fukasaku's Battle Royale was a gateway film into international cinema for many audiences of the early 2000s, and so by 2006, New Line Cinema were hard at work on an English-language remake. But the brakes were suddenly pumped in April 2007 following the Virginia Tech shootings, as the producers sought to reevaluate how an R-rated film about school children killing one another could still be made. The remake faced another huge setback when an adaptation of Suzanne Collins' similarly themed novel The Hunger Games began shooting in 2011, after which it became a pop culture phenomenon in its own right. After this, remake producer Roy Lee finally admitted defeat, that a Battle Royale remake would now just be dismissed by audiences as a Hunger Games ripoff. Lee did suggest he might return to the idea a decade later, but to date he quite thankfully still hasn't. The original Battle Royale is such a perfect organism of a movie, and in the risk-averse, excessively squeamish studio climate of 2024, a Hollywood remake would almost certainly be a sanitized disaster, wouldn't it? And finally, number 1, Small Soldiers. Joe Dante's 1998 action comedy Small Soldiers may not be nearly as recognized as his Gremlins films, but it was nevertheless a fun ride, even if it received middling reviews from critics and underperformed at the box office. All the same, Fox mounted a remake in early 2014 called Toymageddon, with Justin Lin set to direct. However, the remake was ultimately scrapped due to Disney's acquisition of Fox in 2019, which led to roughly 200 in-development projects at the studio getting canned overnight. Curiously though, Toymageddon wasn't actually confirmed to be a Small Soldiers remake until the acquisition and subsequent canning. Very weird. And while the broad concept of toys coming to life and causing havoc is hardly exclusive to Dante's film, Small Soldiers definitely has enough personality of its own that a remake, especially one without Dante's involvement, just didn't muster much enthusiasm at all. Here's a toy that folks did not want to buy.